And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge, back once again with my MCU 22-day watch through, and I have just finished watching Thor. So what are my thoughts of Thor? Well, I don't really remember liking it very much, which seems reasonably predictable given I'm not into fantasy and supernatural and sort of more mythic stuff. But I did relatively recently read Jason Aaron's Thor run and I thought that was amazing. So I've gone back into this now, hoping that I like it a lot more. So what did I think? It was okay, but it had a lot of weak points. So let's start off with the opening. The opening sequence is just not very good. It's got the usual, very cliched flashback mechanic of it starts and then it goes back to a time earlier with Thor in Asgard and so on. Pretty weak, to be honest, from the beginning. It was already getting kind of dull. One thing I will point out is watching it now, knowing where the Thor franchise goes with Ragnarok and the kind of very comedic turn that the series turns into, watching this actually is kind of clear there's always a hint of that. There's so many comedy moments in this that just feel like they would have fit in perfectly in the same theme or tone as Thor Ragnarok. The very first time you see Chris Hemsworth on screen, he's basically shooting off a cheesy grin and winking at someone. And there's just so many moments of kind of banter with Sif or sort of physical comedy moments where he gets hit by a car at just the right moment. And it's like, yeah, actually, there's a lot of comedy potential in this. And I can kind of see, watching it now, it's nowhere near as jarring moving to the comedy tone of Ragnarok as I thought it was. Anyway, yeah, opening relatively dull, relatively weak. Bit of action, not very exciting. The introduction of the Bifrost is interesting because they launch straight into it, and actually visually and even thematically, it kind of helps tie Thor into the Guardians of the Galaxy universe a lot more than I would have previously thought. I remember from reading the comics, Thor was often travelling around the spaceways and going to other planets and stuff, and actually they just lean into that straight away, and I think that kind of helped later on in the franchise with Thor joining the Guardians of the Galaxy. So anyway, he travels somewhere with his friends who are all useless and utterly forgettable, by the way. Like, that was an utter waste of casting. And then there's the first battle sequence of the three in the film, and that's on the Ice Giant's home planet. It's poorly directed, it's poorly lit, the action is poorly choreographed, it was dull as dishwater. Then it goes back to Earth. Yeah, general sort of pretty decent-ish stuff. One notable thing was the casting of Kat Jennings as the character Darcy. Now, I didn't realise she was in this. I must have completely forgotten her first time round. Kat Jennings is an actress who's in Two Broke Girls as one of the leads, and I cannot stand the show Two Broke Girls. However, in this, she's really, really good. Like, really surprisingly good. Anyway, so the film just keeps on moving on. We're about 35 to 40 minutes into the film before we actually get to the scene in this movie, which is actually the exact same scene as the post-credits on the last movie, Iron Man 2, which I thought was interesting because I didn't realise that post-credits was actually directly from this movie. So that was nice. Then you get to the second big action sequence, which is Thor trying to get his hammer back. Pretty good, actually, pretty well done, reasonably exciting, and it introduces Hawkeye, which I'd completely forgotten was in this movie and gets introduced very quietly in the background of this movie, so that was cool. And then there's some more sort of character building, relationship building, sort of interaction with the various characters, all reasonably okay. I mean, it's a relatively short runtime of film in total, it's only 110 minutes, so there's not too much fluff and too much wasted time. And then we get to the final and third battle, which is the Destroyer, or it starts off rather with the Destroyer battle in New Mexico. Bold choice, I always thought that. Most people, even that are into the comics, have no idea what the Destroyer is. I only know what it is because of reading the Peter David Hulk run from about 350 onwards, maybe 345 onwards, in which the Destroyer features for a little while. Having said that, good fight, good battle, good resolution. This is where I want to point out something. I don't want to get too abstract to get too long-winded here, but I just want to point out something here which is kind of script writing 101. If you know anything about writing novels or writing scripts or just the pacing of any kind of narrative fiction, broadly speaking, things tend to follow what's called the monomyth. Now, the monomyth is something that was created or diagnosed rather by a guy called Joseph Campbell. Sometimes it's called the hero's journey. Check it out on Wikipedia, it's really interesting because loads of films, from Star Wars to The Matrix to Harry Potter to whatever you want to think of, follow this template. Now, one of the key things about the monomyth is that at the final battle, the hero seems to die and then has a sort of journey to the underworld and then has a moment of redemption and then comes back with powers XYZ. So like Neo comes back as being Super Neo in The Matrix. Harry Potter, obviously, the last movie, Harry comes back and eventually defeats Voldemort at the last moment. So it's sort of a classic emotional arc where it takes you really down to the very nadir of what you're feeling, and then you come right back up with the resurrection. That happens here in the Destroyer battle in New Mexico. But then the film still has like another 20, 25 minutes to go. And as a result, that third battle, which eventually climaxes in Asgard and is kind of okay, and it's basically Thor versus Loki, that feels actually like kind of like a battle 3.5 or a fourth battle. And in terms of pacing, especially in terms of the way human emotions work and what we generally find satisfying as Western audiences, it doesn't really balance very well. Which I also found really weird, given that J.M. Straczynski wrote this, and he's a great writer. He wrote Supreme Power, he wrote Rising Stars, he wrote the TV show Babylon 5, and I think at the time this came out, he was actually writing Thor as well. Correct me if I'm wrong. So yeah, that was just the kind of final thing I found a little bit jarring. It reminds me of other films I've seen where I've later found out that there were two scripts and they tried to smush them together, and as a result they had some bits where the pacing didn't quite work. And in this regard especially, that final battle was a battle of two halves. And if you know anything, like I said, about the monomyth, about the hero's journey, about narrative pacing, you generally have a 3-arc structure and each arc has its own mini climax. In this case, the third arc had 2 consecutive climaxes, and the first one, the one with the Destroyer, the one where Thor always dies and then he comes back and then he saves the day, that really had all the emotional beats you needed. Whereas the rest of it was kind of an epilogue, or just it was closure for the sake of just tying up loose threads, and it went on for just too long, to be honest. Those are my thoughts. Film was okay, not too bad, but generally not good, and not really one that I would expect to revisit or to talk about much more. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed that. Please like, comment, subscribe. Please support the channel by heading over to Amazon and picking up the novel that underpins everything. And as always, let me know what you think of the series. Let me know if you're following along at home and what you thought of Thor. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Do you see what I mean about narrative pacing? And have you heard of the monomyth? Let me know in the comments down below. And until tomorrow, when I'll be watching Captain America, stay classy.